The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, March 21st. St. Nicholas of Flue. Nicholas von Flue, Bruder Klaus, holds a privileged place in the esteem of his fellow citizens. Ecclesiastics, patriots, politicians, historians, and poets of all creeds have sung his praises, and it can be assured that no religious figure in the history of Switzerland has inspired such a varied and voluminous literature. The saint was born near Melchthal and the Flüe estate on the Sachsterberg, from which he derives his name. His father, Henry, held a civilian position in the canton service. His mother, Emma Robert, a native of Wolfenschiessen, was a deeply religious woman who brought up her two sons, Nicholas and Peter, to belong like her to the Brotherhood of Friends of God, Gottesfreunde. The members of this society, scattered throughout Germany, Switzerland, and Holland, were of both sexes and of every social class. With a loyal adherence to the Catholic Church, they intended through a strict life, as well as a constant meditation of the Passion of the Lord, to enter into a special and intimate relationship with God, as the name of the society indicates. Some of them lived with their families, others formed small communities, and a few withdrew from the world to lead an eremitical life. Nicholas responded especially to the formation he received, and his piety, love of peace, and sound judgment were remarkable from his childhood. At the age of 22, and despite his gentle disposition, Nicholas fought as a soldier in the war with Zurich. 14 years later, on the occasion of the occupation of Thurgau, he again took up arms, but this time as captain of a company. The high esteem in which he was held was the cause of his being appointed magistrate and judge, being sent several times as a delegate to the councils and assemblies of Obwalden, where his penetrating wisdom had great influence. He was repeatedly offered a higher post, that of landamman or governor, but could not be persuaded to accept it. He married a devout young woman named Dorothea Whistling, and their marriage was a happy one. Of their 10 children, John, the eldest, became a landamman still during his father's lifetime, and the youngest studied at the University of Basel and was later, for several years, parish priest of Saxholm. Throughout his married life, Nicholas continued the devout practices of his youth. We will quote the testimony of his eldest son. "My father retired to rest at the same time as his children and servants, but every night I saw him get up and heard him praying in his room until the early hours of the morning. He would often go in the silence of the night to the church of St. Nicholas or to other sacred places." His son, observing him, became convinced that he had a supernatural vocation to contemplation, since he had visions and revelations. He used to retire to solitude in the valley of Melch, and when he was about 50 years old, he felt irresistibly attracted to abandon the world altogether. PL spent the rest of his days as a hermit. His wife did not object because the friends of God recognized such vocations as coming from above. Nicholas resigned his charges. He left his wife and children in the autumn of 1467 and left barefoot and bareheaded, sheathed in a dark habit, carrying a rosary and his crozier. His destination seems to have been Strasbourg, in the vicinity of which there was a convent of the friars with its main headquarters in Alsace. Before crossing the border, however, he received hospitality from a peasant who also happened to be a friend of God. In the course of conversation, his guest tried to dissuade him from leaving the country, assuring him that the Swiss were frowned upon in Alsace and elsewhere because of their rough manners, and that he would not find the peaceful retreat he sought. That night there was a tremendous thunderstorm, and looking towards the little village of Liechtenstein beyond the frontier, Nicholas saw it, in the light of the lightning, as if it were on fire. He took this as a sign confirming the peasant's advice, and immediately retraced his steps. One evening, on his way home, lying under a tree, he was seized by such violent cramps that he thought his last hour had come. The pain passed, but from that moment on, he lost all desire to eat or drink. Later that autumn, hunters searching for game in the Melchthal spread the news that they had met Nicholas in his pasture at Cluster, where he had built himself a shelter of branches under a larch tree. His brother Peter and other friends went to ask him not to remain there, exposed to death, and persuaded him to move to Ranft, another part of the valley, where the people of Obwalden soon built him a small cell with a chapel attached. In this place, situated above a narrow gorge, whose solitude was emphasized by the roar of the torrent in the valley, St. Nicholas spent 19 peaceful years. During the first 12 hours of the day, he was in prayer and contemplation, and in the evenings, he interviewed those who took the road to his hermitage, seeking their advice on spiritual or temporal matters. God had given him the gift of knowing how to counsel, as he entrusted it to his friend Henry Imground, and he continued to exercise it as he had done in the past. Foreigners were also attracted by the fame of this remarkable man who lived without eating or drinking. He was never overly communicative, but he was particularly miserly with his words to those who came to him out of mere curiosity. So also when someone asked him about the reasons he had for abstaining from food, he would only reply, "God knows." That no one brought him food was proved by the magistrates of the canton, who, for a whole month, kept a watch on all the paths leading to his cell. Strangers without any prejudice, such as the doctor of Archduke Sigismund or those sent by Emperor Frederick I, were satisfied with the veracity of the report and deeply moved by the sincerity of the hermit. Once a year, Nicholas took part in the great Museger procession at Lucerne, but otherwise he only left his retreat to attend divine services and occasionally visit Einsiedeln. Gifts from the faithful enabled him in his later years to found a chapel for a priest, connected with his own little chapel, and thus he was able to attend Mass daily and receive communion frequently. The Swiss Confederation had just passed at that time through the most glorious phase of its history. In a period of 6 years, in the 3 battles of Grandson, Morat, and Nancy, the mountainous Porflades had reconquered their independence and defeated the hitherto invincible Charles the Bold, master of the 2 Burgundies and almost all of Belgium. Their reputation was so great that all the princes of Europe sought their alliance. The hour of the most significant triumph proved to be the hour of greatest danger, because internal dissensions threatened to nullify the success won with arms. There were disputes over the division of the spoils between the party of the peasants and those of the city. Another bone of contention was the purpose of including Freiburg and Soleure or Solothurn in the Confederation. Eventually, agreement was reached on most points and was incorporated into a document known as the Edict of Stans. On the issue of the inclusion of Fribourg and Soleure, however, no agreement could be reached, and the passion reached such an extreme that it seemed that the question would be settled by arms. The assembly turned into a disorderly riot when the parish priest of Stans suggested that the final opinion of Nicholas von Flue be sought. The delegates consented, and it was resolved to seek out the hermit. The suggestion was not accidental or suddenly inspired. As we know from the protocols of the Council of Lucerne, that city, which occupied an ambiguous position between the 2 parties in one of the early stages of the struggle, had sent delegates to Brother Nicholas to obtain advice, and it is very likely that the other districts did likewise. And it has even been suggested that the Edict of Stans, a document very much in the style of the statesman, may have been drawn up in the hermit's cell. In any case, it speaks very much in favor of the delegates that, in the heat of their dispute, they had agreed to submit the matter to him. The chronicler Diebold Schilling, who represented his father at the council, tells us that the priest, Imgrand, returned to Stans sweating profusely, and that, locating the delegates in their homes, he begged them with tears in his eyes to meet immediately to listen to the message that only to them he had to deliver. Schilling does not remember the words of that message, but he informs us that within an hour the council reached unanimous agreement. Fribourg and Soleure were to be admitted to the Swiss Confederation, but under certain conditions which were accepted by them in the person of Hans von Stahl, delegate of Soleure. This took place on December 22, 1481. That Christmas there was a special joy throughout Switzerland, and the Council of Stans expressed in laudatory terms its gratitude to Nicholas for his services. There are still letters of thanks from the citizens of Bern and Soleure to the holy man, as well as a letter written in his name by his son John, thanking Bern for the gift he had given to the church. He could neither read nor write, but used a special seal as a signature. Several of the hermit's visitors have left accounts of their interviews with him. Particularly interesting is one written by Albert von Bonstetten, dean of the monastery of Finsiedeln, who describes the recluse as a tall, dark, wrinkled man with thin, graying hair and a short beard. His eyes were bright, his teeth white and well preserved, and his nose well shaped. He adds, he praises and recommends obedience and peace. As he exhorted the Confederates to maintain it, so he exhorts to peace to all who come to him. The dean held him in great veneration, but regarding the prophetic gifts attributed to Nicholas in some media, he cautiously says that no evidence of them has been obtained. 6 years after the Council of Stans, Nicholas fell prey to his last illness, which lasted only 8 days, but caused him intense suffering. He endured it with perfect resignation and died peacefully in his cell the day he turned 70. Immediately after his death became known, he was honored throughout Switzerland as a patriot and as a saint, although it was not until 1669 that his cult was formally sanctioned. He was canonized in 1947. His remains lie in a tomb under the black marble altar near the entrance to the choir in the present church of Saxeln. The habit in which he died is preserved in a glass case in the apse. The two Flighthauser in Flüe date from the days of St. Nicholas, and although they have been greatly modernized, the room in which he lived remains intact.